Welcome, Rebels and fellow YouTube watchers. Well, it's been about a month since Empire at War landed, and I figured that maybe it was time to check in with the community on what we thought about the expansion. Also, I wanted to give you all my impressions of the set in general, now that there have been some tournaments and we've seen a ton of new decks on swdestinydb.com. Also, while we're here, I think it's worth looking at some individual cards as well. I definitely feel like there are some duds in this set, but also some high impact cards. So I'm going to be going over all that stuff today as well. So I've got no more reason to delay. So let's watch the shiny lasers and get this thing underway. Hey, that rhymed. Do y'all remember how happy we were when spoiler season happened? Well, I do, actually. It wasn't that long ago, to be honest, and it's almost as if it hasn't ended either, with FFG showing us legacies and then rivals. But I'm referring to the Empire at War spoilers specifically. You probably saw at least one video on spoilers either from me or one of the other content creators, and it was a lot to soak in at the time. And in a way, we're still soaking it in. And while we've been doing that, people have been cranking out decks left and right, trying to find ways, to fit the new cards into old decks and discover new decks using some of the older cards. In fact, that right there was what the last video in this series was about, which was called "The Impact of Empire at War." And I didn't think I would be doing a follow-up, but here I am. And what I'm going to do today is not only talk about the good and the bad that I think from the set, more like from the perspective of here are some cards that seem to have a high impact, and here are some cards that are totally garbage cards. And I'm also going to talk about some other side effects of EAW, such as what it's done to the resource management curve in this game, and also what's happened with that whole vehicle thing. So let's start by taking a look at some of the cards in Empire at War that seem to be making a real splash now that we've seen what the meta kind of sort of looks like. I want to begin by saying that the cards I'm about to show you are not going to be presented in the order of good to worse or anything like that. In fact, some of them are going to come to you in card set order because I said so. And the first card we're going to talk about is General Rican. Now, for those of you that saw me on the Double Blanks podcast, which I think was like episode 17 or something like that, you may have heard me say two things on there that have basically flown in the face of everything that I've done since. Call me a hypocrite if you want. But the first one that I said was that General Rican is DOA, and the second was that you should tear up your Jedi instructors because they're worthless. Interestingly enough, I run both of those cards in my Hero Mill deck, and so should you. Now, let me clarify and say that General Rican isn't just good, he's quite a beast. He mills cards off your deck very, very fast, and he's got a great health pool. On paper, maybe he doesn't look that amazing, but and he's not, but in practice, he's a workhorse. And having played well over 70 games now with Rican at this point, let me be the first one to tell you that he's actually the hero that heroes needed to make Mill good. He can't do it alone, though, so you do still have to bring Padme for the time being, and Jedi Instructor because she sort of fits the point structure, and she's got a kind of interesting ability that you may use, 1 to 3 times in a game if you're lucky. In any case, he becomes a very good, viable way to make Hero Mill decks work, although it's tough to say that it works better than most other deck choices you could actually be bringing to a tournament because, well, Mill is just an uphill battle in general. The second card worth mentioning is Y-Wing. Now, you're not going to see Y-Wing in every red hero deck, but you will see it in every red hero vehicle deck because it is so dang good. And I think a lot of us knew that coming out of spoiler season. The Y-Wing is a card that brings a small slice of control elements to your vehicle game. There's some timing to this one, depending on what you want to maximize on. Do you want to hit them for damage to strip their shields? Do you want to hit their resources? Do you want to sort of get a little bit of both? Generally it's damage, but it can be worthwhile to snag some resources too if you're looking for a mixed approach. And that is, of course, assuming that your opponent is going to give them up. One of the side effects of EAW, which I'm going to mention later, is that resource generation got a fairly large boost across the board. So Y-Wing could see some play, as in a resource denial choke deck. But right now, it fills a role as a damage dealer quite nicely with some room for improvement. And I think this card turned out to be better than many thought that it would actually be. Now, Kanan Jarrus is worth mentioning because he was the character that Blue Hero needed to help us get away a little bit from Awakening's Ray. Now, that's not to say that he's hands down a replacement, but Kanan certainly has a place in the meta and has had a place in the meta since day one. Kanan is a character that doesn't generate extra actions consistently, but he does allow you to speed through your turn with his ability, which allows him to resolve one of his character die as a before action to any other action you would perform. And today's rules reference guide that literally released a few hours before this video and right after I finished the script clarifies that you have to announce the action that you're actually using so that you can use his before ability. And you know what? Big shout out to anyone over at FFG who came up with this idea because it was a really good idea. The second point to him is that this sort of fair, quote-unquote, stuff is just what the game needs. You can still interact with his die. They just start disappearing faster than you can mitigate them all. And I like this a lot, and I think that his costing was really excellent so that he could fit really well with Ahsoka or in the Qui-Gon decks or put together with 2 Padawans. He's a solid character that has really reshaped the way we think of Blue Hero. And that's why I've included him in his video rather than, say, Ahsoka, who, while good, doesn't change as many decks as Kanan does just because of his ability. So I guess we can't talk about Empire at War without talking about Miss Sabine Wren herself. Sabine has been a really game-changing card for heroes this time around. She is, just in a word, solid. She picks up weapons from the discard, giving her good synergy with the smuggling card, and she can fire off lots of damage with her free dice. And she's got a good partner in Elite Ezra, or even Elite Poe if you run her with 1 die. I also want to mention now with the new rules reference guide that I'm going to be addressing in a video on Friday, you can now discard cards in your hand to reroll 0 cards. So now you can pitch weapons literally for nothing without even using smuggling, right? So I feel like that helps Sabine out pretty significantly. The problem with Sabine is that she exists in a 2-player Kylo world, which makes the stock for monocolored decks plummet significantly. But I think what she brings to the table more than makes up for that shortcoming, especially when you run her with the 2-player game Poe Dameron. Her as 1 die, him as 2. Sabine has definitely brought some good ideas to the game, but I think a lot of people worry she's a bit too powerful for what she does. And I don't really agree with that, but, her die is quite good at 20 for a hero, but I mean, when you compare her to Vader, who has, a slightly higher value die for 1 more point, I think what we've got here actually is a hero with a great point cost, and we're just not used to that. It's almost like we're Stockholming, like, oh my God, hero, why it can't be this good? We're not supposed to be this good. And it's like, calm down. All right. Just accept the fact that she's a hero with a great point cost and probably the best color possible for what she's trying to do, with an ability that is strong at all points throughout the game. Let's just say, nice job, FFG. Keep up the good work here, okay? Now, next up, we have a gun that Sabine herself loves to cycle, and that's the X8 Night Sniper. And I don't think this video would be complete without mentioning this weapon. When I first saw this card, my immediate thought was, this is almost a holdout blaster, and it's legendary. So, okay, it doesn't have a redeploy keyword, and its ability is sort of a non-factor, but it has ambush, and it costs 2, which is just insanely good already. It gives Yellow Hero a 2nd ambush weapon, and Yellow Villain a 3rd ambush weapon alongside the LL30, which came in the set as well. But the Night Sniper, it's literally just 1 redeploy keyword away from being way too good. And I'm glad that it landed in this set because it actually makes Yellow Hero a bit more playable. It also, it adds another weapon for Rey's action cheating if you care about that, although that's being limited in today's rules reference guide as well. And I think its impact on the game is seen simply by understanding that any aggro deck with yellow is making space for this weapon right now. There are very few cards that come into a game and immediately find a home in a deck, and this is one that is it's in that minority. Now, I want to mention that there was actually going to be a third card in this section, and it was supposed to be Heat of Battle. Unfortunately, it was nerfed in today's rules reference guide update, so it got the axe from the video because it only turns 2 dice now and not, as many as you want. So sorry, folks, or not sorry, depending on how you look at it. I originally had called this section Bad EAW Cards, but that's kind of brutal, so I decided instead to just go with calling them Poor Performers. And the first one that I want to talk to you about is Coercion. Now, the reason I've included it here is simple. We thought that this card was going to be a lot better than it turned out to be. And a lot of that has to do with the ruling that we received regarding the ability to just pass all day until your opponent can identify a good time to use that card, or the round ends due to, a claim pass situation. And I don't mean to say that that specific scenario isn't good for the player who gets to take their whole turn generally uninterrupted, but it's not the blowout play that we wanted it to be, or that we were looking for. It's not as good of a solid control element as we anticipated. You're not pulling a price of failure every time that you play Coercion. So I think we had really high hopes for this card, and in just 1 month's time, we've seen it fall out of favor in competitive decks, even in control decks. After it was being talked up like it was the next best thing for villain yellow. Man, Roll On also really seemed like it had the chance to be a part of like some sick combo deck that triggered stuff like Imperial Inspection and Dark Presence and Salvage Stand. And well, I mean, it can be part of a deck like that, but we got a better control deck with Thrawn Unkar that doesn't need to worry about Roll On. And furthermore, Roll On still leaves your die vulnerable to removal. It has its pros and cons, and the biggest con is it doesn't have ambush, and the biggest pro is you get potentially 3 rerolls for the card of just one cost of just this card and no resources. Sadly, Roll On was a card that some players did see a potentially decent card here. It was never great, maybe even good in some kind of edge cases, but ultimately it's really failed to be anything worthwhile for the game itself. And also, just as every set has best cards, I also think that every set has worst cards. And if I had to nominate a card for the worst card in set award, it would be Scatter Blaster. Okay, what the crap is this thing? It costs 3, and I only get 1 base range side of 2 and a modified 3 range side and 2 special sides, which FFG wants me to think is somehow meaningful. Listen, 1 damage to multiple targets isn't that great, and the card limits you to choosing different targets, meaning I can only do at most 1 damage to 1 target up to 4 times, 4 different. Like, it's so terrible. Why would I ever play this card? I'm not really sure. It's just kind of bad, unless, I don't know, 4 wide becomes a thing. I just don't see it even getting play, and even then, I'm not quite sure that it would see play consistently. So let's get down to some more meat and potatoes here. It's really hard to talk about a new set without highlighting what it did to the overall meta. Okay, we can talk about individual cards as high impact, as low impact, best cards, worst cards, whatever. But when it boiled it down, Empire at War had 2 big impacts on the way that we view the game in general. One way is by bringing us additional ways to bring vehicles into the game at cheaper and more accessible costs. And we're going to talk about that next. But first, I think it's important to look at what the other big impact was, and it was the resource generation that it brought to the game. So all the cards that you're going to see here are about the impact that EAW has had on those resources. And there are quite a few cards in EAW that now let you spontaneously generate resources in some way. Sure, there have always been ways to do that, but This set expanded the timings and emphasized the importance of resource generation, building upon our previous shortcomings. So we got cards like Prepare for War, right? We got cards like Truce, which is a majorly good card. And of course, we got Chance Cube, which is appearing in so many decks now, right? Because it's just so good. Yeah, I'm going to take a chance at rolling a 3 resource for 1 resource. I'm going to do that all day long, right? But we also can't forget that there's a lot of other cards. We have to give a shout out to Houndstooth, one for Reaping the Crystal, which is more of a discount card, but is very critical right now to certain decks and certain maybe even up and coming decks now that shields actually matter a bit more with the Vibro Knife nerf. And of course, we've mentioned it before, but Ezra Bridger, he really holds it down with resource disrupt and resource stealing plays, and that matters. And that's not the extent of the cards either, because I didn't even mention things like Tech Team, Imperial HQ, or our buddy Lando Calrissian. And there are, of course, more cards than this, but I'm going to stop right here because there's just so many, but if you had to ask me personally, I think that Empire at War probably had the biggest overall impact to the game in this exact area. Resource generation is something that was limited in the past sets. We still relied on plays like Enrage, or Logistics, or Smuggling, or Unkar's ability to grab us extra money. Now, we have far more options than we ever imagined, and because of that, we are actually taking a look at more 3-cost cards and even some 4-cost cards as well. That means that we're expanding our options significantly. More cards are becoming relevant because resources was the only thing holding us back before. And if it's not holding us back anymore, well, then we can, take a larger view of the sets now. Suddenly cards like Never Tell Me the Odds, which kind of was a dead card for a little while in a way, it's not a dead card anymore. We can actually play those higher cost weapons now too without having to always overwrite stuff. It's changing how we approach NC Destiny, and that's why I think that it's actually a bigger deal to talk about this than what we're about to talk about in how we view vehicle stuff differently. The release of Empire at War was predicated on the idea that vehicles were going to have a big presence in the game. Well, it's been a month, and I'm not sure if you've been paying close attention, but if you're like me and you have been, then you haven't seen a lot of these 3 cards. Hera, Rookie Pilot, Sienna Ree, or China Ray, if you're to believe that. And they're just not ubiquitous. You don't see them all over the place. Sure, you see them here and there, but they're not winning a whole lot of tournaments. And, they're certainly not the talk of the town. You know who is? Kylo is. FN is, although he's going to be less so now, but the rules reference change. And do you know why that is? Because straight, no frills, hyper aggro is still the easiest path to victory in this game. Now, we can certainly take a look at these 3 characters and ask ourselves what we are doing wrong as players. And the answer to that question is, I don't think that we are actually approaching it in a poor way. It's just that vehicles are still poorly positioned in general to actually make the big plays. But it is still faster, of course, to roll Hera, hope for a special, or flip her into one with Maz, as it were, and then resolve that die and put a vehicle out, than it is to save 4 or 5 resources to play that vehicle straight. At least, sort of, right? Early game, definitely. Late game, we get a bit better at it, especially when we include all those cards that I mentioned in the previous section, right? But there's a flaw in the design of the game in general. Every time you put out another support you have to activate, you slow your game down by a minimum of 1 action. That action is, of course, activating that vehicle. You might even think it's as slow as 2 actions since you have to activate and then resolve that die, but you could resolve all range damage together, so it's not always 2. It's definitely 1 though. Now cards like Deploy the Squadron are going to help you out with that a little bit, but that's only twice a game. And chances are there will be multiple rerolls to get every die the way that you want it. Meanwhile, your opponent, who may be running a much faster deck, has already killed your Hera, already killed your Maz, with something like Sabine or Kylo. And your only hope is that your vehicles do an insanely good job of keeping ahead of their damage output during your very slow turns. Now, I've seen so many vehicle decks appear like they're about to overrun the opponent, only to be hamstrung by a faster deck wiping out their characters faster than they can actually activate their entire board. And it's a real shame. You know, it's almost like we were, I don't want to say lied to, but almost like we were definitely misled about the set's actual impact. It's almost as if the two-player game had a larger impact on the state of Star Wars Destiny than this entire expansion. I mean, let's think about it, right? Did it? That was 48 cards, and this set was 160. And of those 48, there was reprints, right? How many of the battlefields in Empire at War actually see play? To me, it seems like one, and it's Weapons Factory Alpha, which is funny because we're talking about all this vehicle stuff, right? And it's the one battlefield that actually helps you get them out cheaper. How many of the characters in this set changed the game more than the two-player set? Cad came really close, I think, but ultimately, it feels like he fell short. Anyway, what's clear to me and to many other competitive players that I talk to is that the vehicle meta we were supposed to get is basically non-existent. Yes, there's the Hera Maz rookie pilot deck, right? And yes, there's Sienna Ree, Hux Guavian deck. They do okay. They do work, but they don't work as well as what's been winning. And I hate to have to be a cynic again, but I think this set just kind of overall stunk. Now, I bet you didn't think that I was going to show my face after what I just said, but I guess I figured I can't hide forever, so I might as well get it over now. Hang me, crucify me, dislike this video, whatever, but I stand by my feelings about the set. I still think, obviously, that Star Wars Destiny is a super great game, and I hope that the next set actually changes things for the better. And I'll define for you what I think that is. To me, making the game better means bringing balance to the Force. Now, in the movie universe, that actually means that there's only Jedi and no Sith. At least that seems to be the interpretation, right? Sadly, that's not quite balanced, is it? Instead, I think we should seek to strike a true balance by examining and embracing the rule of two from the dark side. And what I mean by that is, I would like for there to be 1,000,000 good hero decks and only 2 good villain decks. Then maybe we'll actually have some balance in this game. Now, I joke, of course, you know. Don't take me seriously, but I'm just trying to get those likes back up, right? But I want to feel that way sometimes because with every set, I have to think that the game is moving towards one singular goal, and that is to make sure that both sides can be equally competitive, or at least as close to it as they can get. And what we have now is a huge rift between them, and Empire at War did so very little to bridge that gap. In fact, there are still more villain decks in competitive meta than the hero decks, and the villain decks are even in wider variety. Sabine cannot be the last bastion of hope for an entire faction of decks. She just can't. She is not that good. And my closing thought on it is this, okay? We needed this set to have a bigger impact on hero power level, and it doesn't seem that it's moved the needle much, if at all. Well, once again, you made it through another video, and you're staring at my face, wondering what crazy stuff I'm going to say next. I really just wanted this set to bring the game together in a big way. And, you know, that means bringing a distant part of the game with vehicles well into the mix. And we have some of that now, but I don't think it's enough. And maybe I was just expecting too much from it all. But to not even see one competitive vehicle deck just makes me think that it's maybe more of a flaw with the game, which means that it's systemic. And it's not a problem with us, the players. Hopefully FFG sees that over time and responds accordingly, maybe in the next set or the one after. All right, well, I think I've said enough for one day, so I'll just leave you with a standard channel plug. Tell your friends who want to know more about the game to come over and check me out. Also, if you want to expand your mind about Destiny even further, check out all the other content creators here on YouTube. I have a few listed on the sidebar for this channel. Just click away, folks. The more you know, the better off you are. All right, so I'll see you next time for another discussion on the game, probably the rules reference guide, coming Friday, maybe Saturday. And until then, don't play in traffic, roll some dice, and don't fall to the dark side. And of course, May the force be with you.